Good evening and welcome to this week's Blue Mondays. Blue Mondays is where we take a look at national, state, and local news through a progressive perspective. On this week's show, we are going to continue our interview with Richard Suddith. Richard Suddith sat down with Dr. Barbara Connor, one of our local hosts here, in a News from the Underground segment where they sat down to talk about the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and their report on Iraq and the lead up to the war there. You'll definitely want to pay attention to this. This is going to bring all of that information that they gave you last week into a nice round picture so that you can definitely understand what's going on, what was known, and really how the administration pushed us into this war. It's definitely true. So you'll definitely want to pay attention to that. Then, after that interview, we are going to have another episode of the Freedom Files. This week on the Freedom Files, we're going to take a look at women's rights, something that is seeming to be eroding now in this country, and something that we should all be paying close attention to. But first, as always, this week in the news. President Bush goes to Vietnam. Although he decided to report 40 years late, he finally is in Vietnam. And, it's definitely being lost on the president. He still doesn't see any correlation, or at least he's not willing to admit it, between what's going on in Iraq now and what was going on then in Vietnam. It's pretty sad to say that the late-night comedians seem to point it out, and people of my generation and the younger generations are getting it, but yet this president fails to do so. It's unbelievable to me, the bubble that this man lives in. Keith Olbermann even pointed out that Bush seems to keep missing it, and Keith Olbermann is definitely bringing the point home every single day on his show on MSNBC. You'll definitely want to check that out as often as you can. Speaking of Iraq, more war of the words are happening on last week's Sunday talk shows. Many of the pundits that were on there were making the comparisons to Vietnam and what's currently happening, especially with the Bush trip over. You know, it's interesting to me that we're looking at this, and the longer we're going to stay in Iraq right now, basically watching a civil war implode around our sons and daughters, it seems to me, rather than letting our kids there to suffer and basically be serve as target practice for the insurgents, as the Bush administration calls them, we ought to just go ahead and redeploy them to the outskirts and basically let the Iraqis take care of it themselves. More on Iraq. John McCain, obviously playing to the far right now. He was on the show basically announcing that he will be running for president. No surprise there. What I did find interesting was John McCain's age. John McCain is currently 72. When he would actually assume the presidency, he would be around the age of 74. That means that he would be 78 years old at the end of his first term, obviously trying to run for a second term, which would take him into his 80s. I think John McCain might want to be rethinking this. I don't know. He seems to be completely out of touch. Speaking of being out of touch, John McCain is now saying that we need to put at least 20,000 more of our sons and daughters over into Iraq. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I guess he wants us to further referee the civil war that's going on over there. Meanwhile, more and more are calling for the phased withdrawal of our men and women. I definitely have to concur with them. It's time to bring them to the outskirts and let the Iraqis take care of the Iraqis. Glenn Beck, this guy hasn't really been on my radar screen because, quite frankly, there's enough talking heads out there, conservative talking heads, that he really hasn't risen to the surface. However, he gets our Bonehead of the Week award. Caught on TV. This week, Jon Stewart decided to poke fun at it, and, well, we can't help it either. So here's a clip from Jon Stewart taking a look at Glenn Beck's show. Take a look.
It's Glenn Beck to spot possible enemy combatants, like Keith Ellison, a newly minted Minnesota representative and the first Muslim ever elected to U.S. Congress.
No offense, and I know Muslims, I like Muslims, I've been to mosques.
This is not going to end well.
I have to tell you, I have been nervous about this interview with you because what I feel like saying is, Sir, prove to me that you are not working with our enemies. And I know you're not. I'm not accusing you of being an enemy, but that's the way I feel, and I think a lot of Americans will feel that way.
Finally, a guy who says what people who aren't thinking are thinking. The congressman stuck to his guns. Not that he has guns.
There's no one who's more patriotic than I am, and so I don't need to prove my patriotic stripes.
And I'm not asking you to.
I'm just asking you to.
Well, the clip definitely speaks for itself. It's unbelievable to me that Glenn Beck would go so far as to basically claim that the newly elected congressman from Minnesota is, since he's a Muslim, is basically a terrorist, and that he needed to prove to Glenn Beck that he wasn't. Unbelievable to me that we've stooped this low. This low. Unbelievable. The Colbert Report, not to be undone, gets our clip of the week. This week he takes a look at Rush Limbaugh and how Rush is now basically saying that he's been lying all of these years. Take a look.
Okay, Jimmy?
But the way I feel is this. I feel liberated, and I'm just going to tell you as plainly as I can why. I no longer am going to have to carry the water for people who I don't think deserve having their water carried.
It's true. He has carried a lot of water over the years, and not just to help him swallow all those pills. But
Limbaugh is just as fake as he seems, and now it's basically been confirmed. All of these years, he says that he's been forced to basically stump for all of these things that he didn't believe in. So, Rush, I ask you, what didn't you believe in? Why don't you tell us? Share with us these things that you didn't believe in. Oh, I don't know. Was it maybe Michael J. Fox and the stem cell research when you called him onto the carpet, saying that he was faking it for political gains? Unbelievable, sir. I think it's time you retire and enjoy your Oxycontin and all of your other miscellaneous drugs. Take the time off. I know we deserve it. And that is your Democratic news for November 27th, 2006. We'd like to remind you Blue Mondays is on every single night here on AOC Channel 15 at 9 p.m. Each and every week, we'll take a look at local, state, and national news through a Democratic perspective and basically help you unspin the spin from the Republicans. It's definitely a good time to catch up and feel blue again. The Left Blog is on each and every Tuesday. Tuesday morning, you can log on over to theadvertiser.com. There you'll be able to read my thoughts and opinions for that week. You'll definitely want to make sure that you do that. Lastly, we want to invite you to log on over to LafayetteDemocrats.org. There you'll be able to check out our blog, our news articles, and everything else that's going on. That way you'll keep informed on what's new and what's happening. If you don't have access to the internet, feel free to use our Democratic hotline at 769-7347. And with that, we'll be right back.
In the last century, Americans organized as our nation moved from a farm past to a factory present. Faced with gaping wealth disparities, corruption of our political process, destruction of nature, and a workforce unprepared for a changing economy, these leaders formed a new vision for democracy. Today, we again see the dawn of a new era, from an assembly line past to an interconnected information future. And we must again rebuild our democratic community, one that stands for a world-class education, an economy that is both healthy and fair, a thriving natural environment, healthy people with accessible health care, a secure nation with international credibility, and working elections and engaged citizens that make all of this possible. Not bigger government, not smaller government, but better government. Not left, not right, but forward. The Democratic Party, America's party.
Tick, 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 tick. Massive heat waves. Heat waves. Tick. Severe droughts. Tick, 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 tick. Devastating hurricanes. Tick, 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 tick. Our future is up to you. Tick. go to fightglobalwarming.com while there's still time.
And we are back. This week, as promised at the opening of our show, we are going to bring you the conclusion of the interview that Barbara Connor did with Dr. Richard Suddith. They're going to take a look at the conclusions that were drawn from the investigation that the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence has done in the lead up to Iraq. You definitely won't want to miss this. Some very interesting stuff. Here you go. Take a look.
Hello. Welcome back to News from the Underground. We are having a very interesting discussion with Dr. Richard Suddith, who has been telling us about a very special report, and in fact it is a select report, you might say, because it's from the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And this came out in September of this year. It's still quite fresh, and they have inspected quite carefully all of the evidence regarding the build-up to the war in Iraq, and what their conclusions are now about what was really going on.
Right.
I wanted you to tell me about some of the sources here have been questioned about whether, how shall we say, whether some of this information was freely given. And there was one gentleman in particular, Mr. Alibi, who had led to a lot of misunderstandings, or this statements were used. Tell me about this situation.
Okay, what happened there was that Alibi, his whole name, I probably mispronounced it, but nevertheless, he was one of the first Al-Qaeda members that was captured after 9/11 and prior to the war beginning in Iraq.
All right.
And he was put through the torture process that the United States has developed. The process where it starts out where they do some minor things to make the person very uncomfortable, like they made him lay on the floor, cold floor, with takes his shoes off and everything. And then it proceeded later to torture and sending him to a foreign country and getting some other information. The interesting thing about this was that Alibi figured this out very early and discovered that if he gave them some information, they would reduce his torture.
Well, yeah, I understand. Boudreaux and Thibodeau did it. Yeah,
exactly.
We'd all be talking really fast.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And so the information that they got on the chemical and biological interactions and some of the nuclear things that he was talking about turned out to be totally untrue.
Well, I want to mention here, if I may, this has been the history of the use of torture.
Correct.
Is that people will say anything to get out of pain. And as I say, you might say Boudreaux did it, and of course that's just absolutely made up.
And I would like to read one statement that he made here. It says, the long list of methods were going to be used against him. This is the people now talking about this. And he says that now the people that are talking about causing the torture said that you will confess because 3,000 individuals had been in the chair he was in, and each one confessed. 3,000 people, and they all confessed. Well, you know that they can't all have something to say, but they all confessed.
And we do understand that this use of the term debriefers, as these people are sometimes called, is quite a euphemism.
Right, and I think
it seems to involve usually the threat that someone will actually lose their life, and perhaps, not perhaps, but quite literally some acting out to go with that. So that's very imminent.
And there were two phases to this. One of them was done with the Americans, and then the other one was done with a foreign country. And we all now know that there were, in fact, places where they took people like this in foreign countries.
Exactly. President Bush has now said that, even
Correct.
though earlier that there had been denials out there. But I understand now some of those people are being transferred to Guantanamo.
Correct. But he was beaten too.
I understand he was beaten quite considerably, and also that make you think you're a drowning technique, and we don't need to describe all that. What I want to know is what did he say that wasn't true? Or what led it?
Well, what he said was that there was training by some Al-Qaeda members in Iraq. Okay. But what happened was that he didn't know where they were supposed to be trained, or he didn't know what happened to them after they came out. And in fact, the training process never occurred.
Oh.
He said that they were supposed to go to Iraq and be trained in chemical and biological warfare.
Uh-huh.
It never happened.
Never happened.
Never happened.
All right.
And what ended up happening is basically everything that Alibi essentially said was now reissued from the CIA, saying that none of it was true.
So now they're saying that none of this was true. He wasn't even in position to know whether it was true or whether these things... And all that he said about this chemical and biological weapon connection between Al-Qaeda and Iraq, this was all made up.
Right.
Just under the pressure of the moment.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's right.
And so this has been passed on. Now, I understand that the CIA was dubious of some of this from the beginning, and apparently their, shall we say, their dubiousness was not passed on to Congress.
No, it was not. It was not.
Congress did not hear.
They did not know that they had been essentially tortured in order to give this information,
right.
And that the information was questionable that when they finally got it.
Right. And that's interesting because there have been so many allegations that it was the intelligence from the CIA that was wrong that started off the whole thing. And so I guess we see a little bit of finger pointing here, but this is about as final as we can get. This is the
That's
Senate
correct.
Looking at everything they know up to this time.
And this is actually Alibi actually telling his story after it was all done, too. He went back and says it was all wrong because he went back and said that he only said it because he was being tortured. Mm-hmm. He said none of it was true.
Sure. Well, that's been, as I say, the history of torture. We remember the French with their colony of Algeria. That was when they decided no more torture because it didn't work. It was
Right.
56 or whatever in the battle for independence. And you would think that, well, actually the Geneva Convention, of course, is very specific about
Right.
what is not allowed. Well, listen, I wanted you to tell us then some more about this report and maybe some of the conclusions about the weapons of mass destruction.
Yes. Well, it was interesting because, as I indicated early on in this discussion, that in 1991, actually, Saddam was asked, in no uncertain terms, by the United Nations people that were overseeing his regime at that particular time, that he had to destroy these. And so he did destroy them. And he was never able to bring that back because the destruction was so complete, and he was very concerned about trying to do anything which would jeopardize the possibility of getting the sanctions removed. And so he didn't want to do anything until after the sanctions were removed.
Right. And those were the sanctions about that oil could not go out of the country, and various other most things could not come in.
Right.
And that was what the lead up to.
But
the war.
I do want to try to talk a little bit about two very important ones.
Yes.
One is the nuclear one.
Yes.
Because they were talking about the fact that there was a possibility that Iraq had tried to go to Niger to try to get some uranium oxide to actually produce nuclear weapons. Well, the interesting thing is the two mines in Niger that were being talked about, one of them was flooded, and the other one belonged to the French. Okay? And so they never did happen. First of all, it never did happen. And the only interaction that they had with one of the representatives from Niger was an interaction where they went and they talked about trying to buy petroleum from Iraq. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, Saddam was actually offered some uranium oxide from the Congo. But he turned it down.
Oh.
He turned it down, flat. He didn't want it. He didn't want to be associated with it. So another issue was the business with the aluminum tubes.
Yes. Oh, we've heard about those aluminum tubes.
The aluminum tubes. Okay. It turns out that even the Iraqis, this is now after the war and after even talking with their own people, they said that they would not be adequate for using in a centrifuge. That was not possible. It turns out that they were actually, the purpose of those aluminum tubes was for a housing for a missile that was made by the Italians. And the Italians had a very stiff requirement on the dimensions of the aluminum tubes in order to get the kind of distance out of them that they wanted. And the purpose of the fine detail on the tubes was to make sure that their rockets could get the distance that he was looking for. And that was why the tubes had such a stringent dimension on them. It didn't have anything to do with whether or not they're going to be used as centrifuge applications.
So he did have some rockets, but they were not nuclear, is what you're saying.
Well, he was in the process of trying to develop that. Now, the interesting thing is Saddam did not think that rockets were actually part of the WMD program. However, he did in 1991 destroy all 819 of his Scud rockets that he had received from Russia.
So he destroyed all of these, and when you say Scud, these are short-range ballistic missiles.
Correct.
All right.
Yeah, that's the
all right.
He did destroy all of
He had
those.
destroyed all of those. And then now the uranium and the aluminum tubes, that's all for those people who are following with a scorecard. That has to do with Ambassador Wilson and his wife.
Correct.
The CIA operative, and that whole story about whether Novak, the journalist, exposed a CIA agent's secret. It was all about this nuclear issue, and whether it was true or not. And what you're telling me, the Senate has concluded then that there was no truth to this story about Saddam seeking a nuclear weapon.
Which is interesting. That's what Wilson actually said.
Yes.
That there was no relationship between the Iraqis and trying to get aluminum oxide from Niger.
And so what about biological and chemical and then these mobile facilities? Can you quickly, we just have a few minutes.
Okay, what they found was that the tanks that they were actually using were supposedly, one of these was actually a decontamination tank, but they were actually using it, could have been used for decontamination, but it was actually, they were actually using it for water.
Oh.
Okay, and it would have to be associated with a explosive, a field that had a large amount of explosives, and they were using that as a potential source for water in case they would have a problem with the explosives.
Wow.
Then the mobile launcher, now that one, the mobile biological lab, they looked at that, and what they concluded was that they would require a fermenter, okay? And the mobile facility that they were talking about lacked 11 of the requirements for being an effective fermenter, and of those, certainly 10 of them had to be significantly modified in order to make it work at all as a fermenter. So the bottom line was that the mobile facility that they were talking about did not look like it was related to biological, but they thought it might be possibly developed for use for generating hydrogen. But it was not generated, and they didn't find anything that was biological in it.
And so they did not have the biological weapons, and they did not have the chemical weapons, is what you're saying the report tells us.
Right. Now, they did have some leftover chemical weapons from what occurred before 1991. And what actually happened there is what they're finding now. And what those are residual chemical weapons that they had only partially destroyed. They were supposed to have destroyed them all. Some of the sources for those chemical weapons, some of those leftover, they found some of those, but they were the ones that existed before 1991, and they were either unfunctional or they were partially destroyed.
All right. So they were not operable.
They were not operable. Right. They were not operable.
And you're the chemical engineer, so you can tell us all about this.
Yeah.
So that is extremely interesting. They did not have then any operable biological mobile labs, and they did not have any operable chemical weapons.
No.
Even though probably the U.S. was one who may have given these back.
That's
earlier,
correct. That's exactly correct.
Before the first Gulf War. Well, this is really, I can't thank you enough. This has really been a learning experience. And what I think also you're telling us is that there's now a report. It's available online.
Yes.
And where people can go to see what the intelligence has shown as a conclusion, because this includes classified portions. They've looked at everything
right.
Up until just earlier this month, and they have come to these conclusions.
Yeah, and basically what they've concluded, they had 9 conclusions in the WMD part, 9 conclusions in the relationship to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and all of them have proved to be not successfully justified.
I hear you. So this was the United States Senate.
Right.
That is very interesting. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Suddith, for bringing this to our attention.
Pleasure.
And thank you for talking with us. Thank you for joining us here on News from the Underground, and we hope that you'll come back soon.
Thanks to you, Barbara and Richard. We greatly appreciate all of the time that you spent researching this information and bringing it to our viewers. We only wish that we could have brought it to you sooner. We've been quite busy over here with all that's been going on with our election season. And don't forget, next up we are going to bring you an episode of the Freedom Files. This week we're going to show you women's rights, something that has been eroding drastically over the past few years, and something you'll definitely want to pay attention to. And guess what? That's it. That's all we have time for. Right after we roll the credits, you'll be able to watch the Freedom Files. And until next week, I've been Stephen Handwerk. I'm your host here each and every Monday night here on Blue Mondays. We hope that you'll tune in next week and join us again. Thanks a lot, good night, and take care of each other.